Welcome to Whispers of the Night. Tonight we descend into the snow-shrouded lanes of 1932 Bracken Hollow, where Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings spend a quiet Christmas interrupted by a postman's vanishing. As old war secrets and buried letters surface, suspicion falls on villagers guarding fragile peace. Join us for the case of the missing postman, inspired by true events, a tale of hidden truths and desperate silence, crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this winter mystery unfolds on our own terms. Before we begin, share in the comments. Where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. If this tale captivates your imagination, consider supporting us through our membership program, which includes access to ad-free versions of all our stories and exclusive content. Or leave us a tip. Every contribution helps keep these mysteries alive in the darkness. Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. A curious absence. It was during the December of 1937, just as the season was closing in with a particularly biting chill, that I found myself in the quiet, snow-laden village of Betrayal Hollow. I had accompanied my old friend Hercule Poirot on a rather spontaneous invitation to spend Christmas at the country estate of Admiral Horace Dalrymple, a retired naval man of some renown, and as Poirot wryly observed, a master of punctual luncheon engagements, if not of subtle conversation. Betrayal Hollow was the very picture of a postcard village. Narrow lanes winding between cottages smothered in snow, a stone church with an earnest little bell, and townsfolk who nodded with suspicion or warmth, depending on the wind's direction. It struck me as the sort of place in which nothing more dramatic than a runaway pig ever occurred. On the surface, it was a restful haven, but even a peaceful village has its undercurrents. I observed in those first days an odd sort of guardedness among days. The locals. Pleasant smiles, yes, but too ready, too practiced, as if meant to conceal rather than express. Poirot noticed it too, naturally. He said nothing directly, but I caught him more than once, watching the interactions between villagers with the expression of a man silently tallying. We arrived on the 23rd of December and found the Admiral's home to be as generously warm as his manor. Poirot was clearly enjoying himself. The great detective, though retired, as he often reminded me, took to the Admiral's fireside like a cat to cream, relishing both the heat and the good-natured banter. I confess I, too, was rather taken with the idea of a quiet Christmas, free from danger or mystery. Admiral Dalrymple's house was an old Georgian affair, square and respectable, with a view over the river and draughts in all the right places. The cook, a fearsome woman called Mrs. Beale, prepared robust meals that kept the cold at bay, and the drawing-room always smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and wood smoke. Poirot spent many happy hours discussing naval logistics with our host, though he confided to me he found the Admiral's moustache tragically inferior. But on the morning of the 25th, as the village church bells tolled for the Christmas service, a small ripple of unease began to disturb the snow-covered calm. The postman, Mr. Thomas Cleeve, had not made his rounds. "It's not like him at all," murmured Mrs. Dalrymple, a stout woman with an enormous brooch in the shape of a robin. "He's never once missed a Christmas delivery, rain or snow or sickness. He's always there, trudging about with his sack of cards and parcels." We were sitting at breakfast, the table adorned with holly and the faint aroma of cinnamon buns. Poirot paused his spoon midway to his lips. "Mon Dieu," he said softly, "the English postman. He is of legendary reliability, n'est-ce pas? For him to disappear, it is a matter most unusual." "Perhaps he overslept," I suggested, "or twisted his ankle in the snow." The Admiral harrumphed. "Tom Cleeve is the sort of fellow who'd deliver the King's Post on crutches with a fever. Mark my words, something's not right." By mid-morning, word had spread quickly through the village. The little tea shop was abuzz with gossip, and old Miss Weatherby, who ran the general store, was heard to declare that it was the first sign of the end times. Everyone seemed to have a theory, and none of them comforting. As the service at St. Edmund's Church concluded, and the villagers milled about the lich gate with murmured speculations, the absence of Mr. Stair, Cleve grew steadily more conspicuous. A young girl named Polly brought word that his post-bag had been found half buried in a hedge by the old mill lane. Poirot's eyes narrowed with interest. A post-bag abandoned in a hedge on Christmas Eve. Hastings, you perceived the significance. Yes. I could not claim to. The man dropped it. Poirot sighed. No, mon ami. One does not drop a post-bag in the hedge. One may misplace it on a bench, a doorstep, even in one's own hallway. But a hedge, it suggests deliberate concealment or haste, possibly both. Constable Harling arrived at the Admiral's shortly thereafter, summoned by Mrs. Dalrymple's considerable insistence. A tall, rather nervous young man, Harling had the look of someone new to responsibility and unsure what to do with it. He held his hat in both hands as he spoke. It's likely he took a tumble somewhere and lying hurt, Harling concluded, not entirely convincingly. Slipped off the path by the river, maybe. I have a couple of lads out looking. Pooh raised a brow. Then why leave the bag behind, but not the bicycle? Nor Missy. The logic does not follow. We haven't found the bicycle, Harling admitted, flushing. Could be someone pinched it, or he went off to fetch help and left the bag to lighten the load. Poirot said nothing, but the corners of his mouth tightened perceptibly. By the time we returned to the Admiral's for luncheon, Poirot had determined that he must investigate further. Mrs. Dalrymple did her best to restore the Christmas mood. Paper crowns were distributed, and a great pudding brought forth with flaming brandy. But it was no use. A sense of unease had taken root, a shadow just beyond the candle's glow. And so it was on Christmas afternoon, instead of settling into plum pudding and cherry, that we tramped into the frost-bitten fields of Bushnell Hollow in search of a missing postman and a truth that, though none of us knew it yet, was buried, deeper than any snowdrift. Chapter 2. The Bag in the Hedge. The hedge in question ran along the boundary of Old Mill Lane, a narrow, rooted track leading from the southern edge of the village into a cluster of derelict buildings where long ago water wheels had once turned. Now the lane was choked with brambles, and the old mill stood as a ruin, its stone walls moss-grown and leaning with the exhaustion of centuries. The post-bag lay just off the path, half hidden beneath a drift of snow. A child playing with a wooden sled had stumbled across the dark canvas, poking through the white, and fetched her father. The man had carried the news straight to the vicar, who had wasted no time passing it to the constable. Pooh knelt beside the bag with great care. He did not touch it at once, but rather regarded it from several angles with the contemplative reverence of an art critic. "You observe, Hastings," he said. "The bag has not been dragged. No scrape marks, no furrow in the snow. It was placed here." I squatted beside him. Could it have fallen from the bicycle? An excellent question. But you will note, see here this indentation in the snow, the heel print. It is sharp and undisturbed. Someone stood here, deposited the bag, and then walked back the way they came. I looked more closely. Indeed, there were faint footprints in the crusted snow, just visible in the shelter of the hedge. Harling cleared his throat behind us. "I'll have the lads mark the area off. Not much traffic down here, but still." "Trebor," Poirot murmured. He opened the post-bag slowly. Inside were several small, wrapped parcels, an assortment of letters, some sealed with wax, others with the glue already curling, and folded between two envelopes, a sheet of cream stationery. He held it out for me to see. There were only 5 words written in a hurried hand. "He knows we're finished." My eyebrows rose. Good Lord. Poirot said nothing for a moment. Then he folded the note and tucked it back among the letters. "Perhaps," he said, "it is no more than a lover's quarrel. Or perhaps it is the key to the whole affair." We left the site soon after, Poirot silent and thoughtful. As we made our way back along the lane, he stopped suddenly and turned toward the fields. "There," he said. "What is that building?" "The one with the red tiles?" "That's the inn," Harling said. "The Rose and Thistle. Old Mr. Grey runs it now, though it's mostly his daughter what keeps it afloat. Young Milly, spirited girl. Poirot made a note in his little leather notebook. "Then perhaps," he said softly, "we shall take lunch in there tomorrow and have a word with the spirited Miss Grey." Back at the Admiral's, the mood had shifted further. "Missus," Dalrymple was fussing with the drawing-room curtains, rearranging them for the third time that hour, and the Admiral was uncharacteristically silent as he poured himself a generous glass of port. "I knew something was wrong," he muttered. "The moment I saw that girl's face at church, Polly always chatty, but this morning tight-lipped as a naval tribunal." Poirot and I took tea by the fire. Outside, the snow continued its slow descent, coating the village in an eerie hush. Poirot rose at one point and wandered to the window. He stood there for a while, his arms folded behind his back, watching the white flakes drift against the darkening sky. Then suddenly he turned. "Hastings, let us walk." We bundled ourselves once more into coats and scarves, and made our way through the back gardens and narrow paths that wound behind the cottages. It was dusk now, and the windows glowed with candle light and flickering hearths. The peaceful scene only heightened the disk in my mind. We paused at the gate to the vicarage garden. Poirot regarded the building with mild interest. "Tell me, Hastings, what do we know of this Mr. Cleeve?" "Not much," I admitted. "He was said to be punctual, friendly, reliable. Not the sort of man to vanish into thin air." "No," Poirot agreed. "But you will see, my friend, that men like that, men who do not call attention to themselves, can be very dangerous to the wrong sort of person. A man who notices everything and says nothing until it is too late." He turned back toward the Admiral's. "We shall speak to Miss Grey tomorrow, but tonight we must consider who in this village had something to fear from being known." He gave me a grave look. "And who among them feared Thomas Cleeve?" Later that evening, as the fire popped and cracked, and the grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the corner, Poirot laid out the contents of the post-bag on a small table. He examined each envelope in turn, noting the handwriting, the return addresses, the stamps. A few were invitations, some Christmas cards, a bundle of bills and circulars. He placed it aside with care. "There is a tension here, mon ami, a thread. We must be gentle, yes, but firm. If we tug too hard, the whole tapestry may unravel." He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers once more. "There is something rotten in Bernal Hollow," he repeated more softly this time, "and I fear it is not merely a matter of one man missing." Chapter 3. Of quiet faces and whispered words. The following morning broke under a sky of iron, and a pale sun cast long, thin shadows over Bracknell Hollow. The village had resumed its rhythms, smoke from chimneys, boots on packed snow, but a hush lingered like a breath held too long. Poirot was already fully dressed when I came down, and he was standing beside the Admiral's writing desk, examining a small map of the village, which he had evidently borrowed from a drawer. "Good morning, Hastings," he said without looking up. "Today we walk not to gossip, but to observe. There is a difference, you know." "In my experience," I said, "the former often leads to the latter." Poirot permitted himself a brief smile, "but only one leads to truth." He folded the map with precision. "This disappearance, it is not random. It has symmetry, purpose, like the mechanism of a Swiss watch. So we shall examine the gears. And where do we begin? Not where, mon ami, whom?" The vicarage was as we had left it, neat, sombre, and somewhat anxious in its air. The Reverend Samuel Phipps greeted us at the door, still in his cassock, a wool scarf wrapped about his neck. "I assume you are not here to discuss the nativity tableau," he said, inviting us in with a weary smile. "No, Mulvicaire," Poirot replied. "We are here about Mr. Cleeve." "You knew him?" "Yes, I knew his habits," said Phipps carefully. "He delivered my letters every Tuesday and Friday, always at 11:40 without fail. But recently, a hesitation. He had taken to lingering. He asked questions, mostly historical, about the war memorial, about a Captain Elmore, whose name appears there." Pooh tilted his head. "And what of this Captain Elmore?" Phipps steepled his fingers. "Died in the Great War, young, decorated." There was a scandal long after, quietly buried, a suggestion that he had not died as nobly as reported. Foul play was suspected, but time, as it does, moved on until Mr. Cleeve unearthed it. The vicar frowned. He believed someone in the village had misused the postal service during that time, that a forged letter had arrived too late or too conveniently. He called it a hinge in history. I didn't follow him entirely. Poirot's eyes gleamed, but someone else might have and not appreciated the interest. Phipps said nothing, but his fingers were white against the teacup. Next, we called upon Edith Cleeve, a tall, spare woman whose house bore the air of someone waiting for bad news with practiced resignation. Her eyes searched Poirot's face as though measuring the weight of his purpose. "My brother is dead," she said without preamble. Poirot did not contradict her. "He was never careless," she continued. "If the bag was found abandoned, then it was taken from him. May I ask, madam, was he in possession of any unusual correspondence?" She turned her gaze toward the cold hearth. He'd received a letter without a stamp, hand-delivered, it seemed. He read it, turned white as snow, and tucked it into a copy of the Times. Then he said nothing for the rest of the evening. "You have the letter." She went to a drawer and retrieved the folded newspaper. Poirot accepted it reverently. Inside was a single page unsigned. "You brought it once. You will not bring it again. Let it die as it should have then." Poirot's expression hardened. "Ah, a message dressed in nostalgia but with teeth beneath." Edith nodded. "He told me before he left the house the next morning that some stories are unfinished because someone tore out the final page." Poirot tucked the letter into his coat. "We shall endeavour to retrieve it." The Rose and Thistle was quieter than usual when we arrived. A single fire burned, and behind the counter Millie grey-polished glasses with a determination that suggested avoidance. "You're here about Tom," she said before either of us spoke. "I've already told the constable I saw nothing." "But mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "I am not the constable. I am a little man with a great liking for truth." She glanced around, then leaned slightly closer. Tom asked questions, but he already knew the answers. He was testing people, pressing them softly, the kind of pressing that makes cracks appear. "What kind of cracks?" I asked. Millie's voice lowered. "There's a story. During the war, a letter from the front was delayed, a death notice meant for a young woman here. Her fiancé was killed in France, or so the army said. But the letter didn't reach her in time. By then she'd agreed to marry someone else, a local man. When the truth caught up, it shattered 3 lives. Quietly, of course. This village is very good at quiet ruin." Poirot considered this. "And you believe Thomas Cleeve had rediscovered the original letter?" "I don't know, but he once told me he believed in time-traveling guilt, that some regrets wait decades before finding the right address." She picked up another glass. "He found someone's regret, Miss Poirot, and they made certain it wouldn't be delivered." As we stepped once more into the brittle cold, the last of the afternoon light was dying behind the hills. Snowflakes drifted lazily in the air, and the windows of Brackerol Hollow glowed with the deceptive warmth of undisturbed lives. Poirot walked in silence, his breath pluming in neat little clouds. I had come to recognize this particular quiet, not indecision, but a precise sorting of mental files. At last he spoke. "Hastings, today we have seen 3 portraits, each painted with very fine strokes. Phipps, Edith Cleeve, and Millie. We 3 people touched by Monsieur Thomas Cleeve, and each of them speaks of old secrets, war secrets, postal mistakes, messages withheld." He stopped beneath the old yew tree that marked the edge of the churchyard. The branches, bare and black, clawed upward like questions in the dusk. "Consider, mon ami, what does a postman handle?" "Letters," I said. "Parcels." "None. He handles trust. That is why his absence wounds this village more than murder might. They trusted him with their words, their private selves." He turned and looked toward the far end of the village. A pale light flickered from a cottage window. "There is someone else who understood that," he murmured. Someone who saw what Thomas saw long ago, a quiet man respected who helped manage the memorial fund after the war. I frowned. Who? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Mr. Albert Hitchens, the village solicitor. I blinked. We haven't heard a word about him. Precisely. In a village full of whispers, his silence shouts. He turned decisively. Tomorrow, Hastings, we pay a visit to a man who has made a career of sealing secrets. But now, one of them has burst its envelope. Chapter 4. The letter never sent. The snow had deepened overnight. Brackar Hollow under its thick white blanket resembled a painting half erased, but beneath that stillness, Poirot claimed, lay a heartbeat, irregular, faltering, and dangerously close to stopping. We set off just after 9. The morning was bitter, but Poirot seemed immune to the cold, his coat immaculate, his gait brisk, and his moustache as composed as ever. Our destination was a modest house at the edge of the village, behind a low stone wall and a private hedge dusted with frost. A plaque on the gate read, "A Hitchens, solicitor, by appointment." Poirot naturally did not have an appointment. The door was opened by a thin, formal man of late middle age, his features drawn into lines of quiet control. He wore a waistcoat, no jacket, and his spectacles rested halfway down his nose. "Yes," he asked, not unkindly. "Mr. Hitchens," Poirot said, offering a card. "I am Hercule Poirot. I believe you may have known Mr. Thomas Cleeve." There was a pause, the faintest tightening at the corner of the man's eyes. The postman. I knew him only in the way one knows such people, professionally adjacent, you might say. "What's this about?" Poirot smiled gently. "I believe, monsieur, that Thomas Cleeve had recently taken an interest in a matter you once helped to bury." Hitchens regarded him in silence. He stepped aside without a word. Inside the office was small, ordered, and smelled faintly of dust and lavender oil. Shelves of thick, bound ledgers lined one wall. A kettle sat forgotten on a hob. Poirot glanced about. "You are a man of discretion, a man who does not traffic in drama." "I'm a solicitor," Hitchens replied with the faintest trace of irony. "Not a novelist. Then you understand the danger of a story long suppressed." Monsieur Cleeve was uncovering one. Hitchens took his seat and folded his hands. "Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Poirot?" "No," Poirot said mildly. "I am offering you the opportunity to explain before someone else does it less kindly." There was a long silence. Finally, Hitchens removed his spectacles and cleaned them with deliberate care. "Very well," he said quietly. "Thomas Cleeve had indeed approached me, 3 weeks ago, to be precise. I felt a familiar stirring of anticipation." Poirot remained perfectly still, his green eyes fixed upon the solicitor's face. "He came here with a letter," Hitchens continued, "a very old letter, one I had hoped never to see again. From Captain James Elmore." Poirot said it was not a question. Hitchens nodded slowly. "Written from a field hospital in France, dated October 3rd, 1917. It should have reached Miss Dorothy Ashworth within the week. Instead—" He trailed off, staring at his hands. "Instead," Poirot prompted gently, "it never arrived at all. The letter was mislaid." Hitchens whispered. By then, Dorothy had received the official death notice. She mourned him properly, wore black for a year. Then, slowly, she began to accept Harold Pembridge's courtship. I leaned forward, beginning to understand the horror of it, but Captain Elmore wasn't dead. "Shell shock," Hitchens said barely audibly. "Lost his memory for months. When he recovered, he wrote to Dorothy explaining his survival, his injuries, his hope to return to her. But that letter," he gestured helplessly, "never reached her," Poirot finished, "and so she married Harold Pembridge, believing her first love was dead." "The wedding was in June of 1918, Hitchens continued. "James returned to England that August. Can you imagine? He came straight to Brackar Hollow, expecting to find his grieving fiancée waiting for him. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the mantelpiece clock. I felt sick imagining the scene. "What happened when he arrived?" I asked. Hitchens's voice was barely a whisper. I was the one who had to tell him. Dorothy was Mrs. Pembridge by then, 3 months married, and already expecting her first child. James, he broke down completely, said he understood that if she'd received word of his death, she had every right to rebuild her life. But he never knew about the letter, Poirot observed. Never. He believed the Army's notification system had failed, that Dorothy had simply received the death notice and acted accordingly. He was too much of a gentleman to blame her for finding happiness with another man. "So what became of him?" I asked. "He took lodgings at the Rose and Thistle for a few weeks, trying to decide what to do. He was fragile, you understand. The war had damaged him badly. In the end, he decided to leave England entirely, said there was nothing left for him here." Poirot leaned forward. "But he never left, did he?" Hitchens looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Come, monsieur. You are describing a man with nothing left to live for, who discovers the woman he loved has married another. Such men do not simply book passage to Australia." The solicitor's hands trembled slightly. James took his own life 3 days before he was due to sail. They found him by the old mill where he and Dorothy used to meet during their courtship, and this was covered up. There was no need for scandal. The coroner was sympathetic, recorded it as an accident, a war hero who had suffered enough slipping on the wet stones by the river. The village accepted it. Dorothy never knew the truth. Poirot sat back, his fingers steepled, until Thomas Cleeve found the undelivered letter. Tom realized what it meant immediately. Hitchens said that James had died believing Dorothy chose another man over mourning him, that she never knew he had survived, never knew he had come back for her. And what did Muscle Cleeve propose to do with this knowledge? He wanted to tell her, said she deserved to know that James had loved her enough to come back, that his death wasn't her fault for remarrying too soon. Hitchens's voice broke slightly. Tom said the truth might give her peace. "But you disagreed," I said. "Dorothy is 41 years old, Captain Hastings. Her husband, Harold, is ill. Her children are nearly grown, but know nothing of James Elmore beyond his name on the war memorial. What peace could possibly come from learning she had unknowingly caused her first love's suicide nearly 20 years ago?" Poirot rose and walked to the window. "So, you sent him that threatening note." I begged him to reconsider. I hoped he might see reason, but he did not. No. Tom said some truths were too important to bury, no matter how painful. He was going to deliver the letter personally to Dorothy on Christmas Eve morning. "Which is why someone stopped him," Poirot said quietly. Hitchens stared at his hands. "I swear to you, Mr. Poirot, I did not harm Thomas Cleeve. But you're right, someone did. Someone who knew what that letter contained and couldn't bear for Dorothy to learn the truth. Someone who was present when Captain Elmore returned," Poirot mused. "Someone who knew the real circumstances of his death." "Yes," Hitchens whispered, "and there are precious few of us left who remember those days." Poirot turned from the window. Who else knew the truth about Captain Elmore's suicide? The doctor who examined the body, the vicar who performed the burial service, Harold Pembridge himself. He was the one who found James by the mill. My blood ran cold. Harold Pembridge found the body. He'd gone looking for him. Apparently, wanted to, I don't know, make peace somehow. Instead, he found James floating face down in the mill pond, and Harold never told his wife. Dorothy was his wife, carrying his child. Why destroy her happiness with the knowledge that her first love had killed himself rather than live without her? Poirot was silent for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Unless, Missy Hitchens, it was not suicide at all." The solicitor went pale. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting," Poirot replied, "that a man who had won his bride only through the accident of a mislaid letter might have found Captain Elmore's return inconvenient. You can't mean Harold would never, wouldn't he?" Poirot's voice was sharp now. His wife's first love returns from the dead just months after their wedding. What do you think Dorothy would have chosen had she known James was alive? Hitchens said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. And now, Poirot continued, 20 years later, Thomas Cleeve threatens to reveal not just the mislaid letter, but to start people asking questions about Captain Elmore's convenient death, questions that might lead to a very different conclusion about what happened at the mill that night. Harold is dying, Hitchens protested weakly. Consumption. He has months to live at most. All the more reason, I said, understanding dawning, to ensure his reputation dies with him, unmarked by scandal. Poirot nodded grimly. A dying man has little to lose. Monamy, but everything to preserve. As we prepared to leave, I asked, "Where is the letter now?" "The one James wrote to Dorothy." Hitchens shook his head. "Tom took it with him when he left. Said he needed time to decide exactly how to deliver it. Then it died with him," I said. "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "Or perhaps it is still waiting to reach its destination." Outside, the snow continued to fall, and I found myself looking at the peaceful village with horrified new understanding. "Poirot," I said as we walked toward the Admiral's house, "if Harold Pembridge killed both James Elmore and Thomas Cleeve, then we are dealing with a man who has spent 20 years living with murder," Poirot finished, "and who will not hesitate to kill again to protect his secret." He paused and looked back at the village, where smoke rose peacefully from every chimney. "But his time grows short, Hastings, and desperate men make fatal mistakes." Chapter 5. The Ties That Bind. We emerged from Mr. Hitchens' office, the solicitor's revelations pressing heavily upon us. My mind felt unsettled, not only by the old story of Captain Elmore and the lost letter, but by the dreadful sense that the present mystery was slipping beyond our reach. The snow was thickening again, filling Bracknell Hollow's crooked lanes with an oppressive hush. Poirot walked in silence beside me, coat buttoned tight and head slightly bowed. Only the shine in his eyes betrayed the fevered work of his little grey cells. I tried to marshal my own thoughts. "If Harold Pembridge lied about Captain Elmore," I began, "and if he's desperate now to conceal Cleeve's discovery, surely he is our man." Pooh sighed. "None, my friend. We must not leap to sureties on quicksand. Evidence, always, not emotion." He paused, looking out over a churchyard, now white and unbroken. "But you sense it too, do you not? This business runs more deeply than a dying man's guilt." At that moment a voice called from behind us. It was Constable Harling, his cap flurry with snow. "Mr. Poirot, I have something you'll want to see." He led us along the edge of the old mill lane, where the hedge pressed in dark and close. Here, beneath the low limbs of a gnarled hazel, lay something half-buried, a battered bicycle. The paint was scratched, the chain clotted with ice. Harling gestured. "Found by a farm boy just before the last squall. Tom Cleeve's, by all accounts." Poirot crouched, brushing powdery snow from the frame, his eyes very bright. "You see, Hastings, the bicycle is not far from where the post-bag was found. A man cannot carry both far in snow. Was urgency or pursuit involved, or deliberate concealment?" Before I could respond, a tremulous shout came from the nearby footbridge. "Here, there's something in the water." We hurried across to the pond. A group of villagers huddled there, casting worried glances. Poirot pressed forward. I followed, bracing myself for the worst. There, tangled at the reeds and rimed with frost, was the unmistakable outline of a man lying face down in the shallows. The constable signalled to withdraw, while Dr. Halberd, the local physician, bent to examine the body. His expression, after a moment, told us what we feared. Poirot knelt at the bank, eyes narrow. "No accident," he murmured. "See here, the mud on the coat, the marks on the wrist. Someone pulled him, struggling into the water. The villagers fell into surly whispers. Old Mrs. Weatherby nodded darkly at the inn. "Who would wish harm to Tom Cleeve?" she muttered. I glanced at Poirot, certain I knew the answer. if Pembridge feared that the story of Captain Elmore would emerge. Poirot stood suddenly, bristling. We shall not accuse where the facts are not yet assembled in their proper order. There is another element at play, Hastings. Someone else watched these events, I am sure. He turned abruptly. To the Rose and Thistle, there is a witness yet unheard. Inside the inn, the air was thick with the scent of stewed onions and fear. Milly Gay stood behind the bar, pale and silent, wiping her hands on her apron. Poirot approached with gentle gravity. "Mademoiselle, forgive me. You saw Tom Cleeve on Christmas Eve, did you not?" Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to us. "I saw Tom. Yes. He came to speak, but he was troubled. He said he carried something that would change everything." Her hands trembled. "He wouldn't say what, only that he must see Mrs. Pembridge that day." Poirot nodded. "Did anyone follow him when he left?" Milly hesitated, lips pressed thin. I cannot say for sure. I thought I saw Harold Pembridge wrapped up against the cold, walking the other direction soon after." Her voice dropped. "But I also saw Mr. Hitchens leaving the inn not long before. He sometimes stops by for a bit of tea before anyone else is about." My heart leaped. Hitchens. But Poirot held up a finger for silence, thanking Milly with a bow of his head. Outside, the wind stabbed bitterly at our cheeks. Poirot pulled me into a narrow side street out of the worst of the storm. "Do you see, Hastings? The waters are muddied, yes, but there is a current beneath. Both Pembridge and Hitchens knew of the letter, and both may have reason to preserve the peace, no matter the cost." We trudged through the snow toward the Pembridge house, my thoughts swirling with fears and doubts. Inside, we found Dorothy Pembridge tending a fire, her face drawn, her posture rigid with worry. She greeted us with a composure I found almost inhuman beneath the circumstances. Poirot offered condolences, then turned gently to business. "You knew Tom Cleeve well, madame?" She nodded. "He has been our postman for nearly 2 decades, always respectful, always prompt. And yesterday, did he come to your door?" A shadow crossed her face. "No. I was expecting him. He had promised to bring something important. He never arrived." There was a brief knock at the door. Harold Pembridge shuffled into the room, looking older and frailer than any man I'd seen. His eyes darted between the three of us. Poirot inclined his head. "Moo Pembridge, your movements yesterday. May we trouble you?" Harold's voice was a croak. "I walked as far as the Rose and Thistle. I heard Tom was seeking Dorothy. I had words with him, but I swear to you, Poirot, I never intended harm." He began to cough, a deep, rasping fit that left him slumped in a chair. Dorothy's fingers tightened on her knitting. Poirot let silence fall, then straightened his cuffs briskly. "Merci, monsieur. We shall return when the constable has concluded his work at the pond." As we stepped outside once more, dusk settling over Brackar Hollow, Poirot drew me close. His voice was low and urgent. "Look carefully, Hastings. The net is closing, but not around the necks most expect. Someone here, someone clever and methodical, has controlled more than one story and more than one fate." He turned toward the heart of the snowbound village, his step purposeful. "Tomorrow the truth will be delivered. No one, no matter how practiced at keeping secrets, can prevent it now." Chapter 6. The Solicitor's Heart. A restless wind rattled through Bracknell Hollow as word went out. Poirot had summoned all those touched by the tragedy to the Admiral's crimson drawing-room. Firelight flickered over faces drawn by suspicion and sorrow, while the village waited in the tense suspended silence that precedes a storm. Present were Dorothy and Harold Pembridge, Harold shrunken in his armchair but intent, Milly Gray, pale as paper, her hand entwined with her father's, old Mr. Gray, owner of the Rose and Thistle, Admiral Dalrymple and his formidable wife perched together, eyes wide as centuries at post. The Vicar, Reverend Phipps, hovered at the fringe. Edith Cleeve stood near the window, back-stiff. Constable Harling hugged his notebook, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. At last Albert Hitchens entered, his usual reserve now shot through with fraught anxiety. Poirot, standing at the hearth, allowed the room to settle before speaking, his tone grave and heavy with the culmination of secrets unspooled. "Madame Z, monsieur, forgiveness may only follow truth. Tonight, let us let the truth stand at last." All eyes turned to him. He gestured gently. "Harold Pembridge has confessed to confronting Thomas Cleeve at the pond, pleading, even threatening but not killing. Millie Gray bravely admits she watched, unable to intervene. The vicar, the Greys, Mrs. Cleeve, all have shared their fragments, but the picture remains broken." Silence stretched. Poirot's gaze swept the assembly, then trained on Hitchens. There remains one whose story is not yet told in full. Hitchens bristled, colour rising. "I have told you all I know." Poirot interrupted, voice rising with quiet force. "No, monsieur, not all. You have offered order, not truth. You have spoken as the Ville's solicitor, not as a man whose own life was shaped and ruined by the old lie." Gasps fluttered. Dorothy pressed closer to Harold. Millie clutched her father's arm. Poirot advanced, voice burning with passion. "For 20 years, you carried a torch for Dorothy Ashworth. You shepherded her marriage settlement, her husband's career, her family's very fortunes, all while your own heart was shackled by what you had lost and by what you had hidden. When you failed to deliver Captain Elmore's letter, you told yourself it was for her peace. But when Cleeve uncovered the truth, it threatened not only Dorothy and Harold, but everything you'd done to keep yourself indispensable while forever on the outside." Hitchens tried to stand, but Poirot's words pinned him. "It was not professional pride alone, Mr. Hitchens, but a life of painful, silent longing, a worship denied, curled in on itself until it became anger and despair. You begged Tom Cleeve not to deliver the letter, not to shatter the peace, but because that peace and your place within it was all you had left. He would not relent. So when Harold left the pond, you followed, desperate, cornered by fate. The passion of 20 years, the bitterness of being always the tidier, not the beloved, undid you. In anger and fear, you struck, and in the end, you did not do it for Dorothy's sake, but for your own." Hitchens spat, almost laughing. "Do you know what it is to hold your tongue for 20 years, while lesser men are lauded, while the life you dreamed slips further away each winter? Do you know what it's like to tidy every sordid secret and never claim a single joy for yourself?" Gasps flickered through the room. Even Dorothy's gaze softened with realization. Poirot pressed on. "You kept the letter from Dorothy not to spare her pain, but to keep hope for yourself, and then to preserve the illusion you had helped build. When Tom Cleeve threatened that illusion, he threatened to unmask not only Harold but you as well, the man who buried the truth, the man who could never declare his devotion, and so settled for the cold consolation of order." Hitchens stood, trembling, voice rising. I begged Tom to let the past lie, but he wouldn't listen. He prattled on about justice, about healing old wounds. He'd never known what it is to bleed every day for a past you never lived. Emotions surged, wild and raw, so I pushed him, yes. I saw Harold leave broken and defeated, Cleeve still clutching that damned letter. I alone remained. I told him if he destroyed Dorothy's peace, if he consigned her to a lifetime of guilt and self-loathing, I'd see him damned first. He laughed. So I pushed him into the pond. I pressed his face below the water and watched the truth drown with him. Hitchens's voice broke. For her, always for her, and never for myself. Poirot's features softened, though his eyes remained hard. A passion denied, a conscience corrupted. You became the jailer and the prisoner. Monsieur, Dorothy, trembling, spoke up at last. You loved me, Albert. Hitchens closed his eyes. Agony carved deep in his face. I worshipped you, Dorothy, and so I made certain you would never know the depths of all our betrayals, even if it meant dirtying my own hands. For a long moment, grief and fury mingled in the hush. Then Poirot spoke low and exhausted. In the end, monsieur, passion can no more be buried than the truth itself. I wish there were peace for you, but this is not it. Constable Harling stepped forward, voice trembling. "Mr. Hitchens, you must come with me now." As Hitchens left, broken but strangely unburdened, Poirot surveyed the room. Grief, compassion, disbelief mingling as the storm finally broke. He spoke not only to those before him, but to the whole wounded village. May Bracken Hollow at last begin to heal by letting both see the light. Outside, thawing snow trickled in the gutters and the first notes of morning birdsong drifted into the hush. As the snow settles over Bracknell Hollow, Hercule Poirot exposes Solicitor Albert Hitchens as the killer, whose unrequited love and buried secrets drove him to drown Thomas Cleeve to silence a long-lost letter. The case of the missing postman, inspired by true events, concludes with justice served, yet echoes of fractured peace lingering like winter frost. We hope this descent into village shadows has gripped you, dear listeners. Did you suspect the solicitor's hidden passion, or were you misled by the war's old ghosts? Share your thoughts below. If the case of the missing postman has enthralled you, please like and subscribe to Whispers of the Night for more tales of suspense. Support our craft with a tip via Super Thanks or by joining our membership link in the description. Thank you for joining us, and until our next tale, may your nights be filled with intrigue and your days with clarity.